Hey everyone, today I'll be talking to Scott Ayotte about inclusion and equity at GVSU.
So I'm Scott Ayotte. I'm the Director of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity at Grand Valley State University.
When you first joined the Division of Inclusion and Equity in 2017, what did the school's hiring practices look like?
So the university's hiring practices at the time very much do look like what they are today. So we have what is called a decentralized model of recruitment. In a decentralized environment like what we have at the university, anytime that we have a position that's open for be it for faculty, for staff, or whatever, that's really up to the hiring department to really act as its own mini HR function. So each hiring department is responsible for advertising, for recruiting for that position, for screening applicants, for coming up with the job description and the qualifications, and ultimately making a hire. And so some of the strengths around a decentralized model is that, when you've got individuals that are in that department that are hiring for this role, they can contribute a lot of their skills and expertise to what a quality hire would look like. This is especially true when it comes to employment for faculty level positions. Some of the weaknesses that come about from that is that talent acquisition, it is a discipline in human resources. It's both an art and a science. And I think where there are some weakness, and I don't mean weaknesses at Grand Valley in particular, but just as a whole, when you've got individuals that are designed and tasked with taking on some functions that would normally be relegated to an HR professional, trying to account for quality and consistency and making sure they can do things really efficiently, that's where there's some inconsistency in that approach.
What changes have been made since 2017?
Well, a couple things have come to mind, especially stepping into my role, which is responsible for helping to ensure that we can take a global approach to embedding equity and inclusion and diversity into our hiring practices. One of the things that I had done when I had come on board was trying to understand not only mapping out what our processes consisted of, but also trying to get a sense in terms of what were the actions that we had taken to try to recruit and try to promote for equity and inclusion. What were the results that we had yielded from those initiatives? And then furthermore, what can we begin to do differently, or what should we continue to do to foster our approach? So the first thing that I had done was I had really engaged in a listening tour. I wanted to directly interface with the individuals at at the hiring processes for our search committees, those that were really responsible for engaging in the process. And I wanted to ask them, because they are the end users, in your opinion, what do you feel are some pain points, some constraints, areas that we could begin to improve upon how we can not only hire for quality, but begin to embed diversity and inclusion? So a lot of the feedback that I gotten from them was really around how we can improve processes, how we can reduce some redundancies, and also being able to get a sense in terms of where we could do a better job when it came to education and outreach and learning and development. The other thing that I had done was I had done an audit of what our hiring trends had looked like. So getting a good sense in terms of what is this, when we're trying to establish what a baseline is, where we're at current state. What does that look like when it comes to the demographics, race, ethnicity, sex, gender, disability status, and veteran status? What does that look like when it comes to our current applicant pool for a given year? What does that look like in terms of how that translates into those individuals who are then moved on to the interview stage and then into the offer stage? Because I just started in this role, I was really focusing on that early onset around what does our applicant pool really look like? And what we had found was that a lot of our applicants really did mirror the communities in which Grand Valley serves. So we are a predominantly white institution, and our applicant pools did happen to show a lot of homogeneity when it came to demographics. So that gave us a good baseline in terms of where we're at current state. What I had then done was took charge of what is called the Inclusion Advocates Initiative. Now, the Inclusion Advocate, it is a specialized role on the search committee. Every search committee on campus is required to have one. These are individuals that are composed of faculty and staff that receive special training, education, and tools to support how to embed equity and inclusion in the hiring process. Now, historically and traditionally, the focus of the inclusion advocate was very much compliance-based. What do you have to do when it comes to hiring? What can't you do? What are the types of questions you can ask? What are the types of questions you cannot ask in an interview? So a lot of it was focused on really being the traffic cop, if you will. And I mean that term very respectfully, but a lot of the focus really was on compliance. I then had a number of listening sessions with our inclusion advocates and wanted to get their feedback in particular when it came to, as we think about the overall scope of your role, which is to embed equity and inclusion, are you getting the education and the tools to help you do that? And if not, what are going to be some subject matter areas that you feel would be helpful in helping you succeed in your role? So we had surveyed the entire inclusion advocate population, and what we had found was that a lot of the feedback we received was the compliance pieces are great, but as far as helping us attract actively communities from underrepresented backgrounds, it doesn't really have a lot of practical application. So the feedback that we also received was if you could focus more on how can we identify where there are, pitfalls or red flag areas around equity and inclusion when it comes to how we write job descriptions. How can we better provide for exceptional and culturally intelligent interview experiences for candidates? What are some things that we need to keep in mind when it relates to being able to have conversations with candidates, especially when they ask questions that may implicate their own identity or a protected class? A good example would be you're having an interview with a candidate and they ask you, well, haven't been to West Michigan before, but if I'm selected for this opportunity, can you talk to me a little bit about the community, specifically what the quality of the public schools are like? I've got a family that I'd be bringing over here as well. Well, in that situation, a lot of times our interview panel would, be a little bit stumped when it came to, all right, so they clearly disclosed that they have a family, that they have children. How can we begin to address and respond to these questions in a way that is giving them good information, but also in a way that, doesn't implicate us or, provide any kind of awkward, scenario? So after getting a lot of this really great feedback, I wanted to approach how we did the restructuring of our inclusion advocate curriculum with a design thinking process in mind. Starting with the user perspective, identifying their pain points, being able to focus on what their overall goals are, and being able to match where we have those natural intersections and partnerships. So what we had really done is revolutionize the work of the inclusion advocate to focus a lot of our education on exactly the feedback that they had provided us with, taking it straight from the user. What is it that you need? What is it that you want? And then being able to design curriculum with my office's subject matter to meet those needs. So in a short amount of time, we had revolutionized and revamped the inclusion advocate curriculum to focus less on the compliance-based initiatives and get away from a myopic focus around rules and regulations and legal obligations, and putting more of a focus around here's how you can create better experiences. Here are some ways that that bias can manifest throughout the hiring process that you as an inclusion advocate can be more aware of. And that education worked out really well. What we'd found out also as time had gone on was there was a lot of other need around interpersonal effectiveness. So specifically, if I'm the inclusion advocate on a search committee, how can I better, kind of disrupt conversations, or how can I better redirect or very diplomatically and collegially facilitate conversations around equity and inclusion? So then we had shifted our focus again to incorporate more learning sessions that would feature veteran inclusion advocates sharing their experience, their knowledge around just those soft interactions, if you will, which ultimately led to us having a partnership with the Grand Valley Vice Provost of Health, the Simulation Center, to create simulated scenarios that really would show the interpersonal effectiveness of the inclusion advocate and how they may want to observe and respond and utilize that in their own development when it comes to persuasive persuasive negotiation, coaching, encouragement, looking at being a strategic consultant. So we really wanted to focus the IA model away from being the traffic cop and to really focusing more on being that architect and that diplomat, if you will.
What were some examples of how you changed maybe the wording or the phrasing to be more inclusive?
Absolutely. So one of the pitfall areas or inclusion traps, if you will, that do come about is really around gendered language. And when we think about that, it can be anything from a job title. So if we look at the example, let's say law enforcement. Well, there's a big distinction between referring to an individual or titling a job police officer versus policeman in the more historical and traditional context. Well, that may seem like a minor adjustment when we think about the impact that language and wording can have, especially when it comes to candidates that self-identify as male or female. That can have a tremendous impact when it comes to whether or not someone very well may want to apply for a position. We think about other language in a position description, things that may denote a preference or a bias toward age. It comes up pretty often. A good example would be having language that would read something like a motivated self-starter, or excuse me, an energetic emerging professional, or a foundational employee. Something that would really kind of denote this is a role that's meant for someone really at the beginning of their career. Seasoned employees may not attract or really take notice of that. So that's going to be another area that we've touched on, as well as thinking about some job titles that may also implicate race, ethnicity, or spirituality indirectly. So we look at other progressive industries, specifically in the tech sector, you'll see some new kind of contemporary job titles that will come out that really reflect traditional functions. So rather than saying we're hiring for an accountant, we're going to say we're hiring for a financial guru. Rather than saying we're wanting a data analyst, we're looking for a numbers ninja or something to that effect. Whereas, you look at the words ninja and guru, those have two very cultural connotations as it relates to race and ethnicity or spirituality in that regard. So wanting to make sure that as we think about how we're presenting ourselves to the outside world, that not only are we taking a culturally intelligent approach, but we're also being able to be mindful of being inclusive and respectful as well.
What goals do you have going forward? And do you have any big projects that are on the horizon?
So great question. Some of the goals that we have going forward are being able to continuously embed and implement a data-driven approach to our recruitment functions. So how can we better equip our search committees to go beyond just passive recruitment and take more of a role in active recruitment? When I say passive recruitment, this is where we think of it's colloquially referred to in HR as the post and pray technique. We'll put a job out there, we'll post it, and we will just really hope that we get very strong qualified candidates. Well, that's certainly one way of going about it, and there's a time and place for that as well. As we think about other types of positions and unique needs and underrepresented populations, how can we better equip our search committees and hiring functions to do a better job of advertising for these types of opportunities, reaching out into their established networks, being able to identify, as we talk about hiring for diversity, what does that actually mean? So rather than taking a carpeting approach when it comes to blanketing the internet with our job postings, how can we better and more intelligently identify what populations that we're trying to attract, where we have underrepresentation, and being able to establish contact? The research is already showing that for candidates of underrepresented backgrounds, it takes approximately 4 to 7 independent communication touch points before an application is even submitted. So how can we do a better job of encouraging and training our search committee members to really put themselves in the role of an active recruiter, if you will? So those are some definite goals that we have on the horizon, being able to continually monitor and track our progress. And one thing I'm very grateful for is the opportunity and the position to work very closely with our human resources functions to create more holistic learning and development initiatives when it comes to not only educating them around the process that we use internally, but how we can focus on really kind of coming up with that blend of quality of hire and equity and inclusion, and making sure that we can create that a really well-tailored approach.